Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be discussing with some Cartier Women's Initiative Award finalists about building a viable social business. So everybody, all of our panelists here have great social ventures that they are going to tell you a bit more shortly. But first, my name is Menke. I'm the founder of Access Afya. We are a primary care innovation company in Nairobi, Kenya. And we think that everybody should have equitable access to high-quality healthcare. And we deliver that quality healthcare through a chain of pharmacies, clinics, and diagnostic centers that use some innovative technology in addition to some lean process innovation to be able to get the price point for a healthcare visit under $4. I'm going to be asking some questions to our panelists, but we're just going to start with a quick introduction and give them each a chance to tell you about their vision for the world. So I will hand it over to you, ladies.
Hi, I'm Erin Keaney. I'm COO and co-founder of Nonspec, based out of Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. And our goal is to really make affordable prosthetic devices that allow amputees worldwide to get back to their normal lives. And I'll pass it over to Swati.
Hi, I'm Swati. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Arboreal Innovations. We are a plant biotechnology company trying to combine advanced scientific R&D with sustainable and scalable supply chains for natural products. So currently our focus is on stevia. Stevia is a zero-calorie, completely natural sweetener that is already replacing aspartame, sucralose, and even sugar all across the world. So yeah, I mean, that way we are a unique venture because we lie at the intersection of biotechnology, agriculture, and food sciences. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Kristina now.
Hello everyone. My name is Kristina. Really happy to be here today together with all of you. I'm CEO and co-founder of BLITAB, which is the world's first tactile tablet for people with sight loss. We invented new kind of actuation technology, and we provide blind and visually impaired users with just one piece of technology, which enable them to maintain a gainful employment, to improve their literacy, and at the end, improve their quality of life. So I would like to invite Diane to join us and introduce yourself.
Hi all, I'm Diana Yousef. I'm also dialing in from Boston, Massachusetts. And my company, I'm the founder of Changewater Labs. We're a clean tech social venture that believes that everybody should have access to a safe, private, dignified toilet. We are able to create a toilet that can flush away 95% of daily household volumes on site without power, plumbing, the need for water, or extensive infrastructure. So that's who we are, and I'll hand it back to Melissa.
Great. So this is the Cartier Women's Initiative Awards. So we do want to start by just talking a bit more about being women entrepreneurs. I know that when I was starting my business, I felt like you're dealing with a few different things. You're dealing with being a woman, but also being a young woman in my case, and I think with the case of a lot of the finalists that I got to meet. And then also running something that is a social venture, which, you know, the word in and of itself is still kind of figuring out what exactly that means. So we're explaining a lot, and I wanted to just start with Kristina, and then anyone else can jump in and talk about just specifically what advice would you have for women entrepreneurs? What did you learn from your entrepreneurial journey?
It's a great start for our conversation today. First of all, actually, originally I'm from Bulgaria. It's a small country somewhere in southeastern Europe. And there, as an industrial engineer, and actually one of the first in the history of the university, I got 2 gold medals of my extraordinary achievements in the university and so on. And I had the idea as an engineer to develop a new kind of mobile device. And just imagine a female engineer at that time, around 4 years ago, with this crazy idea to change the life of millions of blind people out there. And also at the time where there was not such a popularity among female entrepreneurs, and also at that time we also didn't talk about female entrepreneurs at all in Bulgaria. So it was double times harder than anyone else at that time to start something from scratch. But I still figured it out. I moved to Austria and I started something from scratch. So this was the first struggle and challenge starting a business with double bottom line. And after that, I had to change my perspective in terms of firstly helping people with disabilities in order to integrate in the community and have an active social life. And on the other side, think about how I can make my company sustainable, how I can build a business model which can, lead me to scale my social impact. So I believe the second challenge I had was really to think about scalability and making the venture financially sustainable, and think about all of the metrics and everything that's standard and something typical for a business and normal startup.
I think my biggest, I'm, when you said a lot of young women might be dialing in for this, I'm not young, I'm sort of mid-career. And I think my biggest challenge was getting over my own imposter syndrome. So it's basically, figuring out or getting beyond all the self-doubt. And in my case, and the reason I sort of brought age into it is that I started my venture basically because I had my first child and moved cities, basically moved to Boston, and then 3 minutes later had a child. And so it was it was kind of a double whammy that basically sent me off the career cliff, where I basically felt completely irrelevant, didn't have a job waiting for me. And so I had to reinvent myself, and I had to do it, again, I was doing myself from scratch in a way. So there was the idea of how do I reinvent myself and make myself relevant? And then how am I going to do that? What am I going to work on? So I started Changewater Labs back in 2013 and ended up spending 2 years working on it without actually talking about it with anybody. I didn't have it on my LinkedIn page or any of that. And so I basically, it was a struggle for me. I didn't look around and see a lot of other new moms starting clean tech ventures. And so part of the reason that the Cartier tribe, I guess, is so important for me is now, it's been one of the biggest resources for launching as a female entrepreneur is to have other women who you see are doing it. And at the time, I didn't have a reason to believe, because I didn't see other women doing this. And over time, I got over that. And I think the biggest thing about getting over your own lack of confidence around it is that you start having very little tolerance to everybody else's issues with women entrepreneurs, which there are many. But I think you're more sensitive to all the doubts that people put on you when you doubt yourself. And so I would say, and the only way I really got over it was I just had to get through it and spend time and figure out that I wasn't wrong and I wasn't crazy, and start to see things work and start to work on my messaging. But yeah, so I think that, for anybody in the audience who's thinking of doing a startup after having a kid, it's possible. And so I think that's my answer.
And I feel like I'm hopefully on my way to being that confident. I have recognized most recently that I really phrase things differently than my male co-founder, and how different traction he gets when he speaks certain ways. And the way that I speak works really well in personal groups when I'm talking one-on-one. But when I get up and I make a presentation, it has to be different. It has to show this own confidence that I have in that normal conversation, but it comes across differently. So I aspire to have that confidence. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really interesting theme to draw on. I think this issue of phrasing and confidence or in communication styles. I remember reading a really interesting article. I don't know if you saw it a couple of months ago, around even just women tend to get asked different questions as business owners that put them a bit more. I'm seeing a lot of nodding. I'm not sure if the audience can see all of that.
Oh my God, yeah.
So, and then it's more likely to get asked in kind of a venture style business. how are you going to take over this market? Whereas a woman is more likely to get asked, when are you cash flow positive? How are you cutting costs? So I think that it's kind of it can be a bit vicious in that way, is oftentimes our phrasing is less confident to start, and then we are asked questions that make us sound less confident.
Yeah, I mean, even I would just like to share one incident that happened with me. And this happened when we were raising our seed round. And one investor actually asked me right away that, okay, this is all fine, the business plan and everything, but what happens when you get married? And I was like, I was a bit taken aback. I was like, how does that even matter, right? So yeah, I mean, it's still strange and a bit unfortunate that we still face those kind of questions. But the good thing is that that gentleman actually ended up investing himself in the business. So yeah, and I hope that his thinking has changed since then.
I think we get asked a lot, like questions that are all different flavors of how are you not going to fail? And I had this like just a couple months ago. I was pitching on stage. I managed to be the one female sort of finalist in a competition, and it was there were two of the assessors or the evaluators who just refused to believe that I had any idea what I was talking about, and their questions got increasingly more idiotic. But they didn't seem to have a problem with it. They were asking me to answer these idiotic questions that didn't make any sense. But essentially, and then I ended up hearing about the evaluation, how it went, sort of behind closed doors. And essentially, the questions were all around how the heck does she know what she's talking about? And somebody tried to advocate for me and say, she has a PhD, she has an MBA, she worked for McKinsey, she worked for the World Bank, she worked in venture capital. They didn't get that far. They didn't list my credentials. They just said I had credentials, and that got laughed off immediately by two male evaluators. And so it was just the assumption was that we couldn't possibly be capable of doing this. And that type of stuff happens behind closed doors all the time. And then you get code language when they actually see you face to face to say, oh yeah, you'll get there. You're very close. You just need to do X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z is always something that they didn't ask anybody else to achieve, but it happens all the time.
I like to consider that type of money dumb money. They don't know what they're doing. You don't want to deal with that if they're not going to see you for who you are.
Second to showing, I mean, the theme of this week is talking about viable social businesses. And even if we're kind of assumed to not be viable, I'd love to know just what were some of the first things you did to test the viability of your product and believe in it enough to convince others to believe in it too?
That was an exciting journey for us. My team started as almost entirely engineers. So the first thing was make the prototype, and we made a lot of them. And what we did differently than any other prosthetics company is we said, okay, how can we make this affordable when we start designing? So we actually designed from the beginning for manufacturing to reach the large volume of amputees that there are in the world. Then once we had a prototype, we started testing like crazy. And that means two things. One is physically. So we actually have tested to meet world standards for durability. So we have impact tests and cycle tests, and we did all sorts of, before we had access to equipment, we were actually throwing our limbs off buildings to see how durable they could be. Because the forces that go through your limbs while you're walking are incredibly high. And then the next step was to make sure no one else was doing what we had stumbled across, which was an adjustable limb. So we did tons of patent searches and made sure that there was nothing else on the market or potentially could be on the market that someone else had done. And we were actually shocked to find that no one else had come up with this adjustable limb. So we were able to go through the patent process and successfully get a patent, which is great. And then we targeted specific competitions that would validate certain parts of our business. So we've done the American Mechanical Engineering Society competition to make sure that our engineering was there. We've done business plan competitions. We went through all sorts of amazing Boston programs that allowed us to really get mentors in the area, especially in medical devices, and make sure that we weren't crazy. And the age thing is definitely a problem for our team because everyone goes, where's your gray hair? Who here has put a medical device through to the market before? And we have to slowly just learn as much as we can and convince people that the reason we're going to do this is because we're coming at it from a different angle than someone who's done it before. And that innovation doesn't just have to be in your product, it has to be in your business. And then it can't just be held tight to your team. You got to put it out there and say, okay, you've done this before. How does this take on it sound? And you basically just collect feedback from everywhere and look at patterns. Because some people are going to be like, it's awesome, it's perfect, it's going to go great. And other people are going to be like, it's terrible, it's never going to happen. And you need to find the constructive criticism in between that to help you build on each component. So those competitions, including the Cartier Women's Initiative Award, have been incredibly helpful. We had to make a 20-page business model, which I hadn't done in years. So sitting down and thinking through all of the concepts that other people care about in it from an investor perspective was incredibly helpful.
I would like to share my journey as well. So financial viability was, of course, one of the key areas that we always, we looked at and, kept it at the helm of the things all the time. And we actually did a pilot when we got into this. And this was in the initial days. So the idea of Arboreal that, we want to get into the supply chain business and want to basically streamline the herbal supply chain that is currently very, fragmented all across the world. So we started with that idea that we would, streamline the supply chain and try to compress the 11 to 12, step chain to more like 3, where there's a buyer, there's us, and then there's farmer or the collector in between. So that's how we started. And even before I got into Arboreal full time and decided to do it full time, I did a pilot with another large FMCG company in India just to check and just to validate the idea that whether this is something that is that can be done and whether we can create enough value for all the stakeholders involved. So even before we got into stevia or the business how it looks today, we did this pilot with another company on a completely different product although, but there were immense learnings. We made a lot of mistakes, we learned from them, but in the end we realized that although there are issues, they can be solved. And that was also one of the the point of realization for me that this is the time that I need to quit my full-time job in Singapore and go back to India to do this, because I felt that a lot of issues that we were facing in that pilot phase could have been avoided if I was there full-time looking at it. So yeah, so on one hand it helped us validate the business model and the idea, and on the other it also gave me kind of the conviction that I should get into this full-time and this can be done.
Especially, we have several together with Erin, we have a hardware-based company. So it's really difficult, I would say, to validate your product and business having a hardware product on one side, on the other side also to combine it with social impact and how this reflect on quality of life at all. So at the beginning, it was really hard for us, even because of the language barrier. Because as I mentioned, being originally from Bulgaria, I moved to Austria, and there was my first validation with a customer. And at that time, it's especially difficult when the user cannot see your product. And I just remember we were working together with my friend at that time and future co-founder, and we saw a guy who is blind with his white cane through the street, and I saw now is the moment to ask him. We didn't have a prototype, we didn't have 3D model printed, nothing, just the idea in our head. And I think I was brave at that time because I was speaking even German with my dialect. Perhaps nobody understood me really what I'm talking about, but I just helped him and said, listen, my name is Kristina and I have something I would like to share with you. And this is very specific when somebody is just, listening to you, what you're sending as a message. But I'm really happy that Patrick, really understood that we want to develop a new device and would like to help him in his daily life. And he said, yes, let's go for a cafe in 2 weeks when you have, just a 3D printed thing, and I can test it, give you your feedback and so on. And this is how we start from our, first idea type of prototype to going through all of the stages that, typical for a product. And after that, not after that, during all of the time, we validate the idea with our users. And of course, at the end, going and say, okay, how much would you pay for it? What's the value of this product to you? And this is how, it's not, we realize from day one that we are not a digital business. We're a pure hardware business with impact, and this makes the game even more harder.
So true, Kristina. And we had to get on the ground and start working with amputees. And we were lucky to be able to do that in India as our first market. And we had quite the language barrier as well. Even the clinicians and the amputees wouldn't speak the same language. So we immediately had to get a team on the ground in India that could be there when we couldn't. Just like that Swati brought up too, it's so much easier when you're there. But I think the other thing that came up that about hardware and bringing it to someone to try for the first time, you're always very nervous about liability and like, is this going to be safe? I know I designed it to be safe, but it's such a nerve-wracking process. But as long as you can find really people who are super interested in having the new technology, you can get so much more feedback right away, and that sort of spreads to other people who want to try it out, which is always exciting.
Yeah, I think some of the themes are definitely getting feedback from your users, resiliency, and then this idea of being present. And I'm also just really fascinated in this image in my head of walking down the streets of Boston and seeing limbs falling from the buildings that Erin is testing the product resiliency on. But Kristina, you also said something about co-founders, which made me think about just team, and of course the importance of having a really strong team and getting a viable product to market. I'm going to hand it back over to Diana, but I was wondering if you could tell us about how you found your first hire, partner, or co-founder.
So I'm going to caveat this and say that before I found my actual like person that I call my co-founder, I had two other teams that came together and then fell apart. So, I went for 2 years trying to get that team, and it was painful. So, I mean, just to, sort of go back in the ancient annals of Change Water, I started the Change Water with two friends / colleagues, which is exactly like the textbook thing that if you've read Noam Wasser's book on the founder's dilemma, that's what they say is like the best way is find somebody that you worked with before. And in my case, they were people I worked with before and were friends. Well, the one thing I didn't take into account was that they both had a much shorter timeline in terms of what they wanted to do in terms of getting to a successful, revenue generating business. So we're trying to start a business that's developing hardware, and they both wanted to basically have a payout within, less than a year, and a big payout. So I hadn't, they didn't tell me that when we started, and I hadn't realized that. So sort of, a couple months into it, they kind of bailed and went off to do something else. And that's when I kind of had to decide, do I, sink or swim? Do I keep going, or do I quit? So I decided to keep going. And just because, in some ways had nothing better to do and had no better idea, and nobody was knocking on my door to hire me. So I kept going, but trying to innovate in an echo chamber by yourself sucks. It sucks. And so, it was really terrible. And I think, Kristina, you met me right at the time in Mexico when just before I got to Mexico, I had given myself permission to quit. I said, I'm done. It was an
interesting experience there.
That's a whole other story. But anyway, so anyway, so I decided, I'm going to quit, but first let me go do this pitch thing in Mexico. So then Mexico, there were a lot of other lessons that came out of Mexico, but sort of I pinned down my messaging about what we were doing in Mexico finally, and was able to come back to Boston and then pitch that at like a innovator mixer dinner thing at MIT. Ended up attracting another team of 8 people to come join me, mostly students. So that was all fine and good for 6 months, except that I was the only person who was full-time and everybody else had all their other stuff to do and all the other stuff they wanted to do. So we were again misaligned. So then that was like November of 2014. Then by May of 2015, I had this crazy fateful day that happened. So basically started the day off. It was in May, started the day off planning that my afternoon was going to be a big team meeting to see if we could try to accelerate our product development to meet a deadline for, a pilot partner. If and it was super ambitious, but I figured there's 9 of us. We should be able to figure out how to do this. And so we had a team meeting that afternoon. Next thing, found out I was pregnant for the second time. Not completely sure how I was going to do startup and new baby at the same time, but okay, let's figure this out. Third thing that happened, nobody from my team showed up for this team meeting. They all forgot to tell me in this aggressive plan that we came up with on a timeline that they were all taking 3 weeks of vacation. Nobody mentioned it at all. So all of a sudden I realized my team was not happening. So I'm alone, I'm pregnant, and I have a $40,000 check that I now have to figure out how to return it. So the other thing I had scheduled that afternoon, which I kind of wanted to cancel, was a coffee with this other woman. So, I don't know if it's obvious to all of you, but I'm Egyptian American. So anyway, I was on email 6 months earlier introduced to the other Egyptian American woman in Cambridge that is doing a water startup. So we traded emails for 6 months and never managed to meet up. And so then she emailed me like a week before that and said, hey, I'm back from all my stuff. I have a pause. Let's meet for coffee. I had forgotten who she was and thought she was somebody else. So I agreed to meet with her. Then that day, totally down because I'm going to have to send back this check and close down my company. And I had this coffee with this person who already had a startup. So why am I wasting my time? Well, it was too late to cancel. So I decided, fine, I'll just have the coffee with her, but I'm not expecting it to go anywhere. Well, we sat down. I realized who she was. She was this other woman that had a startup. So I wasn't expecting anything except we'd trade war stories and make friends, but she wasn't going to be able to help me. I sat down, I told her what I was doing. She said, I love it. I'm going to give you all of my extra time. And that became my co-founder. So it's like, I have this image in my head of sitting down at a cafe with a cup of coffee and the gates of heaven opening up. And all of a sudden this magic started to happen where, I found my sort of startup soulmate. And we've been working together since, and she's indispensable to me. And I don't know how you engineer something like that. It's definitely a happenstance. And I thought I met everybody in Cambridge, but I hadn't met her yet. And she was the one that made all the difference. So that's my story.
Yeah, my experience has actually been a bit different because the kind of industry we are in. So as I said, we are kind of at the intersection of agriculture, biotechnology, and food sciences. So there's quite a spread within the team itself. So we do have quite a few people with gray hair, and we just felt that, it was important to engage them. And also, because we could learn a lot from them, from their experience and learnings. But the challenge with actually, getting such people, really senior people on board and working with them is that you have to be really, really good at managing ego, of people, because they are coming from a different angle. They are at a different stage of their life. They have different priorities. And they have a certain thinking of their own and where they are or what they have learned or where they stand, in terms of their area of expertise. So you really have to manage egos when there are multiple people, different ages, coming from different areas and backgrounds together. It is quite a task. And that is also, something that I have learned through this journey, because I am an introvert. I used to be very, very awkward socially, but, having dealt with all sorts of people, it has been, quite a learning experience.
Yeah, I think one of the other challenges that I know I faced with Access Afya and building a team up front was it seemed like there's this cycle of you need a great team to raise capital and you need capital to hire a great team. And you can get a bit stuck there. So I think a lot of people end up having these interesting stories of how you were somehow able to attract amazing people, sometimes before you actually have the money to give them market rate.
Yeah, and I do consider myself to be really, really lucky, because we have managed to, get really good people on board. But yeah, it is a task to, manage everybody's expectations and ego, especially when people are disagreeing on something. You really have to ensure that, nobody is, feeling left out, or, you are giving them, due credit for what they've achieved so far.
Kristina, did you have something as well on this?
For me, it was actually it was a challenge, yes, to find the right people. But I believe I was also lucky, because from the beginning I started together with a friend of mine, Bulgaria, and we moved together to Austria. And there I didn't have home, family, even friends. And I just decided to be part of the Impact Hub community, this co-working space and network of social entrepreneurs. And this is where I found our first team members. And the thing was, I was not looking for somebody who wants to get his or her job paid. And I think this was a trigger from the beginning. And this is how we are working also right now. Yes, we can for sure pay not the biggest salary, but we can pay people so they can lead a normal life. However, even right now, the mission is the most important thing, because if you don't believe, or if I didn't believe, then I have been quitting so many times, because it's really testing, trying, failing, and this once and once and once again. So it's right now we're around 10 people working full time. And we're lucky to form a team of diverse advisors and so-called advisory board through our journey. So we know who can we rely on when there are questions. We don't feel we are confident, because we are learning through all the way. So we're really happy right now to have very passionate, not only engineers, but also financials guys on board, people that support us all the time.
That's great. I wanted to shift to then capital. So we've talked about a great product, a good team, and so we clearly need money to then continue to take this into the world. I know that from my experience running a social business, we've had to tap into all sorts of different types of capital, from philanthropic to accelerators to equity investment to debt to kind of impact-oriented zero interest debt. So kind of going through the full kind of spectrum of the types of capital available to you. I'm wondering about your experiences. Maybe I'll start with Erin on just how you actually raise capital and if you've changed your strategy at all over time.
Sure. So when we first started this project, it was really sort of a student-run thing. And to just follow up on the team bit, we had like a team of 8, and they were all we're all graduating at the same time, and we tried to figure out who was going to stick around, and we had this huge division on what was important. And that's when we really decided that this was a social impact business, and it's more than just getting money out of it. So we wanted to make sure that this device was constantly there to get to the people who needed it the most. And that makes it very hard often to attract a venture capitalist, because they're looking to see you're going to target the US and the UK markets where you can make a lot of money on a product, and they don't often see the benefits of reaching to a developing country, even though a lot of us have business models that say, if you have millions of people who can buy this rather than a couple 100,000 or whatever, it makes a substantial difference. So what we did is, first, as students, we leveraged that. And if anybody's a student thinking about ideas, this is the best thing to do, is participate in competitions and accelerator programs where you just get to learn everything you can about business and running startups. And just taking all those opportunities and pitching and going out and doing those competitions, you can rack up quite a bit of money that you're not giving away anything of your company for. So my company over the last 4 years has raised $500,000 in grants and competitions. So both my co-founder and I still own 50% of the company. And now that we're no longer students and we're kind of shifting to really try to scale our product, we're starting sales and we need to move even more rapidly. We are starting to look at investors, but we are also still applying for larger grants where we can really leverage money to do the R&D that we need to build out our product suite that will help us further down the road. So you always have to be thinking about the short term, the long term, and the mid term. So you're always kind of doing all these paths at once, but you have to recognize that most of that funding, 6 months is sort of the minimum that you're going to put in before something is a return on that. And it's usually a lot longer than you'd expect. So that's why we've started building relationships with VCs and mentors who have connections to the people that we might need to connect with for funding down the road early on through all of those competitions.
I have an interesting perspective on this because I used to be a venture capitalist. So I have a, but I knew going into sort of the social venture space. I mean, I think the social impact investing space is kind of confused because they don't really know what their balance is between how much they want to invest in impact versus how much they want to invest in returns. And, so it's all very, it's across the spectrum, and I do find some investors really haven't figured out where their equation is. So I would say that, a lot of social ventures are going to be, even if they're profitable, they're going to be slow or low profit. And so what we need is patient capital, and we need capital that, they have to decide what kind of risk they want to take. And so with a clean tech social venture, I am the worst mix of everything because I am, developing technology. So there's technology risk. So I decided pretty early on that VCs aren't going to be a good way for me to fund the product development. I mean, they might, if we get to the point where we can show compelling sales and growth, they might be good growth investors, but not good pre-revenue investors. So I had to be very kind of conscious and deliberate about how do we get to the market without being able to access venture capital the way a traditional clean tech company can or a health tech company can. So we've been trying to essentially get as much non-dilutive funding from grants and awards and try to get the product across the finish line as quickly as we can, go to equity investors and get funding from them. But at that point, then what they see is they're funding kind of the market growth, and that's that might be more in line with their appetite. The other reason I want to do it that way too is because, we have a technology that can be used in a whole host of different water treatment and other industrial and other types of applications. That doesn't sing to me. What sings to me is the toilet, the toilet, and the girl who gets to, keep herself safe because she doesn't have to go outside of her home to use a toilet. And so that's what sings to me, and that's what sings to my team. And so if we want to keep our social mission intact, we need to figure out how to get to the market. And prove to the investors that we invite to be with us later that we're doing things correctly. And in order to keep our social mission intact, we have to be able to get to the market and start selling it. And so it's, so we're racing to essentially keep our social mission core and not be diluted by other people that tell us to go after different markets. So that's kind of, I don't know if that answered a question. I mean, I think all of us are sort of, figuring it out as we go along, because there is this kind of new ecosystem in terms of funding. But I do think you have to be pretty clear early on when and if you are attractive to traditional VC, because generally most of us aren't.
I can probably add a thing or two because I'm currently in the process of closing a pre-series A round for my company. So we raised a small seed round earlier in 2016, and we have been on the road for the last 7 to 8 months to raise more money, and this is kind of a pre-series A level, and it has been quite an experience. We have knocked a lot of doors over the last 6-8 months. We have been lucky, and we have actually managed to find an investor. We are currently completing the paperwork. But yeah, we went to everybody. We went to the traditional VCs, faced the same issues that Diana was mentioning. We went to the family offices. We went to the usual suspects, the impact investors. But yeah, in the end, I think we just realized that as much as people or funds claim that we are impact focused and we are an impact fund, ultimately they are looking for returns. They are looking for good opportunities as well. I mean, timeline of course may vary for a tech focused VC. It may be 3 to 4 years, and for an impact focused VC it may be more, 5-7 years maybe. But ultimately they want to look at the business as a business. So social impact is there. I mean, it's good and it's an add-on, but it has to make sense financially. It has to be financially sustainable. So we kind of stopped, pitching our business as a social business, and we, went to all the investors like any other commercial, opportunity. So with some luck, we have managed to find the right investor, and we were luckily in a position to actually choose, among a few options. So that was good. But one big learning has been that, it is always a law of, it is the law of averages. So you have to, keep trying, and you just need one yes from someone you like.
I would like just to jump here and say, that definitely we are also in the position to choose our investors. Here in BLITAB, I'm not sure if we were lucky or if our technology is scalable also in other industries, but we receive investment proposals in our early, I would say startup stage, even before having a first functional prototype. We got 2 investment proposals from 2 different parts of the world, and the main surprise for me as a founder was, are they really looking into the impact of the company, or they're looking into technology and how scalable it could be in other industries? And luckily, both of them are funds that with double bottom line, and they really want to see you grow and scale your impact. But at that time, we decided, no, let's wait for our functional device. Let's see how we can accelerate our scale, and then we'll come back to you. And luckily, right now, we spend a lot of time here in San Francisco in order to fundraise, in order to boost our go-to-market. And I'm really happy that so far we are self-sustainable, and I think this is the most important part. Being a social entrepreneur is to find the right way and time to welcome your investors and partners.
No, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense, and I think it is really interesting that I think that Diana, you're exactly right. I think from this kind of big umbrella statement of impact investors, there's still a lot of thinking within that sector to really kind of clarify the various investment mandates or manifestos that exist under that umbrella. And I do think one of the difficult things about that is it's
comment about that
in IRR, and it's not always as easy to measure your return on impact. So people can't quite give you a quantitative equation that they're looking for.
Can I make a comment? So I was at SoCap back in October, and all the investors there were, I mean, not all, but like a lot of the ones that were on stage were talking about how Now, social impact investors want to get market rate returns and social impact returns. And the thing that just struck me was that there's this real misunderstanding. I mean, maybe I'm putting a target on my back by saying this, but there's a real misunderstanding about what social impact investors should be, what purpose they serve. They shouldn't be going, if they're going after market rate returns, why don't they just become venture investors, like straight up capital market venture investors? Because, by putting the impact layer on top of the market rate returns, they're making themselves harder, like more, harder than regular VC. And I think what social impact investment should be, it should be more patient capital. Like it should be capital that, allows somebody to try to figure out how a problem that government hasn't figured out and business hasn't figured out. We're all trying to do something that's really hard. And, the social impact ecosystem should be thinking long term and thinking about what are the companies that are going to deliver value in 10, 20 years. And I get it. So they can't really be, they can't really be asking for market rate returns, because that means they need a return in 7 years or whatever it is. That's like 10, 20, 100x what they put in. And that's not what most of these companies are going to be able to achieve.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a really interesting article. I think it was a Oxfam Sumerian Partners collaboration that was really looking at some of the challenges, and I was at SoCap as well, some of the kind of ripple effects through the sector of saying you don't have to trade off your market returns for impact, is then you make the people feel a bit silly if they are trading off that those returns, and then you can kind of scare away a more softer, patient capital partner to adopt this kind of new manifesto. I think patient capital makes a lot of sense, and makes a lot of sense for businesses that are operating in completely risky and unpredictable markets that don't tend to benefit from some of the public sector support that sometimes more venture-backed businesses elsewhere might have been able to tap into as well. We're running short on time, so I wanted to just give everybody a chance to kind of close out. I know that one of the kind of themes that we had talked about a bit before this was the idea of partnerships, and how you actually can form strategic partnerships and form actual win-win partnerships. I'd invite anybody that has some kind of advice to other businesses looking to how to build strategic partnerships, maybe give some insight on that. If that's not really something that your business has done, please still give a closing kind of statement to the audience.
So we haven't found a great way to measure everything. That's kind of our next step, and I think that is what a lot of investors want you to somehow be able to do. And we do collect information on every conversation that we have with amputees and their clinicians, and we're constantly collecting that feedback and using that internally. For us in general, it's the impact of those users' stories, like what they come to us and say, I was able to go play with my daughter today. I was able to go for my evening walk. I was able to get re-promoted into being a nurse. Like, these are amazing stories that keep us going when any of this gets really rough, which it can be oftentimes. You're kind of doubting yourself at every turn when something goes wrong, or your timing is off and you're trying to figure out how everything's going to work. Just going back to the root of those stories and the impact that you're making, that's the only way to get through it. And it's worth it.
Talking back to, we cover so many things about investors and struggles we have had during the years. But the thing here is really to even not to go back to the root, but really just open your email, as I'm doing one of the first thing in the morning. And when you see how many emails are flowing through your inbox, with different captures like testers, users, potential customers, and people all over the world writing you that tomorrow or in 2 weeks her daughter has birthday and she would like to buy a tablet or to provide her as a present, and can you do this for us, or can you just make it possible to visualize brain structures of biology cells in classes with your device. This is just things that sometimes you don't even think how useful you can be or what's the value behind. Sometimes we just forget this during the workflow, and this is a great way to remind us every day how we can change people's life and how we can bring value to people that we don't know at all. So this is something that it's so important, and we should realize that this is not the case for everyone, and this is not the case for many startups out there, and that's what makes us different. This is how we define ourselves as social entrepreneurs. If we would like to make the biggest profit of the world and be self-sustainable from day one, then we shouldn't have choose to be social entrepreneurs. So this is what matters. And thank you also Cartier Women's Initiative Award, for putting value into impact, creativity, and innovation in social entrepreneurs. And this is what matters. This is what makes us different.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to, repeat some parts of what Kristina said. Big thanks to Cartier Women's Initiative Awards. I think it's, it has become an institution now with the kind of people it has gotten involved, the community it has built. So that's great, and I hope to be, involved as much as I can over the next, not just this year, but in the coming years as well, and try to help more and more people in my capacity, whatever I can do. But yeah, I mean, I really feel that for women entrepreneurship and to further the cause of women entrepreneurship, mentoring is extremely, extremely important. And I see, Cartier Women's Initiative Awards as a platform to do that. I'm looking forward to it.
I think I'm going to answer the impact question. So I think my impact is, or at least I hope my impact is going to be on a couple different dimensions. One is, and this is related to sort of I call it the tribe that Cartier Women's Award Initiative is helping to form, is this idea of women as innovators and women as game changers, and it's not just all women. It's not just the 22-year-olds, and it's not the people who've been senior executives, but they're people like me who come out of sort of that middle space, and have to reinvent themselves. And I think I would like to prove out, because I didn't have this as a proof point when I was trying to start this journey, but I would like to prove out the idea that women can always reinvent themselves and can always be relevant and high impact, no matter what stage you're at, and no matter what your life circumstances are. So, in my case, I was this mid-career person who, again, as I said, fell off a career cliff, and and had two children, and felt stuck. And I see so many women at my stage in the career where you're either stuck in a career that we started with, but we're not given the chance to really have a lot of impact or influence, and so they just kind of go, they don't want to leave that because it's a safety of doing what versus doing something different. And in my case, I didn't have a lot of choices. I had to kind of let go of everything and reinvent myself. So I would like to hopefully succeed at this, and then be able to be part of a growing tribe of women that show that you can reinvent yourself and be high impact and influential at any stage of your life, no matter what your circumstances are. Two, the other thing that's also a personal layer of impact is I have two daughters, and they're young. They're not 7 and 2 years old. They're not thinking about their careers, but I want them to see that women can, without having to always ask permission from everybody else, i.e. white men, who they can be and what they're allowed to do and what impact they're allowed to have. So I want them to know how to essentially, reinvent themselves and draw their own lines. And then three, as far as the product that we're putting out, we want to have social and environmental impact by creating sort of dignified, safe, hygienic sanitation that allows people access in the privacy and dignity of their own homes and the safety of their own homes, but also conserves water and avoids carbon emissions in the future, so that we can have sustainable, scalable sanitation for a planet of 10 billion people. So that's what I'm hoping.
Thanks so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but it's been a really good discussion. And if those of you watching look at the comments just right under this video, we're going to put some links to the businesses that these women are running and also some opportunities to potentially support them through the various campaigns or hiring drives that they may be running at this time. So thank you so much for joining.